Alright, so here is the FS5. I've got it rigged and I thought I'd show you kind of just a brief overview of where everything's at and how it works. So one of the great features about this camera, first and foremost, is the built-in ND filter, which is right here. You just twist it like you do on many of the Sony cameras. And this is actually an electronic ND, so you can set those settings in the camera, but by default they're kind of your base standard ND settings, like 1/4, 1/16, and 1/64, I believe. On the side, we've also got a bunch of other buttons that you're probably familiar with if you've used any Sony camera. We've got audio settings here if you're doing any kind of audio input. Down here, we've got the ISO or gain settings, which you can also set those in the camera menu in the camera. I usually have mine set to low because I really want my ISO as low as possible. When you're shooting S-Log 3, I believe you're limited to the base ISO of 3200 and then up from there. So 3200, I set that to 6400, and then 12,800 is the next setting. You've also got white balance settings here, which you can set in the menu, and then you've also got control for each of these items up here. So your shutter speed, you actually click this button and then use this click wheel here to set that, and it shows inside the viewfinder there, or on the external LCD, which I don't have rigged up. I actually have a PixE5 external recorder set up, but there's also just a standard LCD for viewing camera display information and stuff. But you can look in the viewfinder there for that stuff. The iris, if you have an electronic lens, which I have a speed booster on here with a Canon lens, but it still works. You flip this switch to iris, and then you can control your iris settings there. You can hear it click. And since it's an electronic ND filter, you could also switch it over to ND mode and adjust your ND and dial it in that way as well. You can set the camera to full auto with this button here, which was clicked when I first turned it on. That's bad. Don't do that. Have that turned off. You want everything manual. You can see up here when I click that button, it starts adjusting things automatically, and you definitely don't want that. To get into your media, you click the thumbnail button here, and that brings you into like a media review mode, and that's how you format your cards if you're recording internally. The camera can actually take 2 SD cards there, so you can record simultaneously. One is a backup, or you can do it as an overflow method if you prefer. The camera is limited to 8-bit 420 if you're recording internally in 4K mode, which I'd recommend you record in 4K. But if you want to do 1080, you can actually do 422 10-bit internally. But there have been some bugs and some issues that I don't know if Sony has updated their firmware 100% to fix those and remedy those problems, but it is an option. In 1080, you have a little bit more color information to play with. If you're in 4K, you are limited to 420 8-bit. Now, if you're recording externally, like we are here with this setup with the PixE5, you can output HD SDI, or you can output HDMI. I wanted to do HD SDI, but you can't do that and get 4K. For whatever reason, Sony decided to limit it to 1080 via SDI. So if you want 4K, you've got to do HDMI, which is fine, but the HDMI, if you can see, is limited to 8-bit. You can't set it to 10-bit, unfortunately. So that is one of the downsides of this camera. Neither the HDMI nor the HD SDI port are perfect, but because I want to record 4K externally, I'm going to do HDMI. Other than that, you've got the battery port here and all the other stuff you'd expect. There's a nice side handle that you can use for triggering recording. If you want to record internally and externally with this camera, you've got to choose your display as one or the other. So in this case, we have to view the display externally, so we turn the internal display off during recording. It's a setting in the menu. It's kind of funky, but if you want to record internally and externally, you've got to turn that internal display off. It happens automatically once you start recording. It's just a setting in the camera menu. Other than that, there's not much else. Like I said, you could rig up the standard LCD off of this point right here. You can screw that in and get that all set up. But for our purposes, we're going to be recording externally. ProRes 422 8-bit, unfortunately, like I said. But yeah, just a lot of buttons. I will say the menu on this camera is maybe a little bit better than some of the other Sony ones, but not substantially. It's still kind of slow. kind of clunky and stuff is buried in there and everything's not exactly where you'd expect to find it. But for the most part, it's laid out in a reasonable enough fashion that once you get in there, you can start figuring stuff out. Other than that, you have any questions, just ask.